Good morning, Dr. Moore. I see Kathy. Can you hear me? Oh, hold on, Dr. Moore. We don't quite have you up yet, so let's see if we can get all the mics on. All right, try again, Dr. Moore.
I'm just logging in. I don't know. I'm behind.
Kathy, does yours work?
There you go. You just came in, Dr. Moore, so I think we
Okay.
got you good. And Ms. Rollins, can you hear us as well? Okay, it sounds like we just need to make sure we check that the computers on the other end are unmuted as well.
This is Adrienne. I can hear everybody just fine on my end.
Great. Thank you for joining.
No problem. I moved some stuff around. Thank you guys for your grace this week. Great. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I want to make sure. Ms. Rollins, are you able to hear?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
we heard everybody loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, with that, let's get this board meeting called to order. I apologize that I am not in Little Rock. Had something planned a while ago, and as special board meetings go, they come up, and I'm thankful for Zoom that we can all be here today. So with that, we will start our meeting with a moment of silence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, ma'am.
Great. So we will move on to the action agenda. And I just want to make sure, Ms. Hunter, can you hear us okay? I believe you're on as well. Great.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Well, let's get going. Our first action item is the Huntsville Public School District. Huntsville, we appreciate you all coming back to us after we heard this item last month, and I believe I see the superintendent on. Stacy.
Yeah, and Hope Worsham from
I hope it's gone to great.
Accreditations, she'll kind of
Thank you, Ms.
reintroduce
Worsham.
the waiver request to the board, and then we'll be able to have questions for the school district.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner of Public School Accountability. So the request has come from the Huntsville School District to request a waiver of having to allow for two of their fine arts classes to combine and have one teacher teach more than the allotted number of students in the day for fine arts only. Superintendent is on here on today to answer any questions that you have.
I'm sorry, I'm really having a hard time hearing you.
Push it up. It's just too far.
Yes, me too.
Is that better?
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, thank you. So just a reminder, the waiver request is coming from the Huntsville School District for their intermediate school to be able to combine their fine arts classes and allow one teacher to teach more than the allotted number of students for that class. Their reasoning is to be able to provide more core instruction in the morning, and the superintendent is on in the Zoom today to answer any questions that you may have regarding the request.
Great, thank you, Superintendent Warren, for being here today. Would you like to start with some remarks?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Hawkins is the building principal at the intermediate school. She and I had worked, she had originally approached me about potentially doing this waiver. I approved it from the building standpoint, or from the district standpoint, and supported it, or do support it now. It is combining art classes only, so it's not all fine arts, it's just our art sections. It allows for more core instruction time to be available for our students at our intermediate building, which is grades 3 through 5. And It doesn't shorten any of the instructional minutes for the art classes. It still allows for the same amount, I think actually a little bit more of our art instruction time. We would be pushing in an aide to help out in that class period, since there are 2 combined classes in that period. So I think that was all brought forward last time, but I just wanted to make sure that that was there.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Board members, let's start with those in person. Ms. Keener and Mr. Bragg, questions for the school district?
Forgive me, I've slept since our last meeting, but remind me, was this the report that we heard about an issue with the buses needing to leave early and missed instructional time? Am I mixing up two of the, thank you.
Yeah, I can reiterate. I think a lot of our board's concerns were on that 4-day week and potentially
Correct.
not wanting to shorten opportunities for students because the district was a 4-day week.
Correct, yes. It did not have anything to do with buses.
Okay.
Yep.
So I can address a little bit of that if you want me to. This request was going to be made regardless of the calendar that we were proceeding with. We were already in talks about the schedule for the upcoming year in the building. Ms. Hawkins and I were, and we were going to be proceeding forward with this no matter which calendar was put forward before our school board.
More questions on that? Ms. Skinner, anyone in the auditorium? Ms. Rollins, questions? Oh, you're on mute, Ms. Rollins, if you don't mind.
How many class periods then are you talking about with this request? That's not really clear in the letter.
Ms. Hawkins, can you address that? I believe it's 4, but I'm not going to, no, it's more than that. I apologize.
Yes. So some days it will be, we have 8 third grade classes. So some day, like 1 day or 2 days a week, they may be. So it's not every class every day.
Okay. And then it was good to have you on, Mr. Warren, just to know that you were supporting this. Is your school board supporting this as well?
They are, yes, I would say it that way. They are aware of it. They have been aware of it for a while, and I have not received any feedback saying that they are not in support of it. I guess that's the best way to put it. It didn't have to go before the board for a resolution or for, approval. They were made aware of it in late April, early May, before Ms. Hawkins presented it as a waiver approval, and have not voiced any concerns to me about it.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about tier 2 and tier 3 intervention? What will happen during those times when the students are pulled out?
So for our tier 2, we use our CFAs. So in Cs, we meet and talk about the data and decide what the kids need. And then during the tier 2 time, we work on our grade level essentials. And that's based off of CFAs, Acadience scores, and so forth. So we give intervention based on that in small group settings. And then on our tier 3, we do our dyslexia, special ed, like more small groups if they need more one-on-one. And then teachers can also pull students that have 2 or more years gaps and work with them on their needs. And that's kind of the point, and it's like why we're wanting this waiver is because it allows more time to get all of these needs met.
Okay. And then you're confident that your parapro is gonna be strong enough? I mean, I think of 50 students in one classroom, whether it's art or whatever subject it is, that's a lot of students.
Yeah, I'm very confident that our peers are very strong at pushing in, and they've already worked with students in lots of settings this year and pulling students, and the art teacher and I think will work well together.
And I'm sure you're gonna monitor this as a principal.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Dr. Moore, if you don't
Ms.
mind.
Woods, do you have questions? Or Ms. Hunter?
No.
Okay. Ms. Hunter?
I'm sorry, Dr. Moore. Just one question for Ms. Hawkins. The teacher is in favor of this and is very supportive of it and not concerned about the large class size. Is that correct?
I would say she is willing to do what's best for students. I mean, she is probably concerned because, but having a co-teacher working or a co-para working with her with that would help. And honestly, like, we have to look more at what's the best for our literacy and math, with us being a D and us trying to really meet all of these needs. Not that art is not important by any means, but I feel like we've really got to look at meeting our special ed needs, following the special ed inclusion model, getting these tier 1 solid, our tier 2 and our tier 3 groups. So that's really more the point in why we're having to do this.
Thank you.
I do have a few questions for you all. So can you let me know, what are the other specials that your students take, and why was it chosen to do art versus PE or another class to double up?
They do music, library, PE, and then art. And then we have a computer lab as well.
Okay, was there any consideration to doing, doubling up on computer lab or PE instead of art? I see art as such a great time to enrich students in literacy and in math, as you talk about needing to pull up scores.
The reason you have to meet the 1,440 minutes a year for the art, so in order to get all of that met, that's why it would have to be doubled.
Okay. If you had a 5-day school week, would it be easier to meet those hours?
It's not really about that, more the timing with the number of students and classes we have for the pullouts. So typically when you have 8 third grade classes, it's split into 2 different pullout times. So the problem with that is you're trying to follow all of these, like getting your tier 1, your tier 2, your tier 3 needs met, plus following the new SPED inclusion model and not pulling your dyslexia students out of core instruction. If you go the typical way, you're working around 3 lunches, 3 recesses, and 6 pullouts, versus trying to get creative with the schedule to get all these student needs met. It breaks it down into 3 pullouts, 3 lunches, and 3 recesses. So that allows your teachers and your special ed teachers to have common planning time to really dive in and look at our data and meet the needs of our students.
I think that is great to have that common planning time. It is not my intent as the board member to micromanage your all schedule or to make decisions on what's, obviously, what's best for your students. The concern that I continue to have is that 4-day week, and I know that, again, wasn't your decision, but I don't want policies such as that to harm students, particularly when we're talking about a D school where students need a lot of support. So I think this is why this issue was brought up to us here again. I would like to ask a question of Ms. Warshman of the agency, if that's okay. Can you let us know why this is a standards of accreditation request as opposed to an Act 1240 waiver?
Yep, because they're requesting the waiver for 1-year period of time, so that's why it falls under a standards for accreditation waiver. And because the waiver is specifically towards class size. For an art class at the elementary school, there is a limit currently in the number of students that can be in that class. But because it's for 1 year is why it's a standards waiver.
But we have approved 1240 waivers for 1 year, but generally they'll request for more, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, and have we approved a 1240 waiver or standards of accreditation request similar to this, where we've allowed such a large class size?
During my time here in the past year, we have not had a standards for accreditation waiver of this size. I could not speak to the 1240. I would have to ask our legal team on that.
Okay. If this was a 1240 waiver, would it require school board approval?
1240 waivers do require school board approval.
Okay, and this does not.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions, but I will open it back up to if any board members have any additional questions or comments.
I have one question. This is a one-year waiver. What would you anticipate for the next year?
He's still muted. I think if I can speak for her, she can correct me. Ms. Hawkins can if her microphone comes back up. But I think after each year we would be reassessing the schedule to see how it worked, to see if it had the impact that we wanted, and then working through that system at that point in time. That's why it was considered a 1 year for us originally.
Okay, thank you.
And we will be systematically evaluating, every week, every month, every quarter, whether or not this is, the impact that this would have on our students and our staff and our faculty.
Superintendent Warren, I know that the decision to do a 4-day week does not involve the state board. That's something your local board made. Can you speak to a little bit about why that decision was made, and if they knew there would be, class size and different repercussions from that?
Sure. Yes, we started back in January to process. Actually, I can speak to. I started informing our board about just the different options that we have for calendar that the state provides. There are 4 different options, and we started going through those with the school board just to present to them what those calendars might look like, what their benefits, what their drawbacks are. Then in January, we conducted a Facebook Live community forum that was widely viewed by our community at large at Huntsville. And we sent out surveys. And in that presentation, we presented all 4 calendar options that are out there just to give information. We wanted to gather feedback from our community on what they felt like might be a viable option for us. We did the same thing as far as outlining, here are the positives, here are the potential drawbacks for those calendar options. And then we sent out a survey, we sent out a survey for those for the community, and even broke down how the community responded. Were they staff members? Were they, guardians? Were they parents? Were they community members at large? Then we also had times in the afternoon and evening where people could come and submit surveys to us in person and answer any questions. We could answer any questions that they had about it. We had over 1,000 surveys returned, and we are a school district of about 2,200 students. That showed, roughly over half, or right at half of our community and our staff members and our all points combined were geared or looking at the 4-day week at that point. We answered any other questions that may have come up during that time frame. We presented it to our PPC and to our CPPC, who then presented it to the school board for approval in March.
And now, do you all provide any sort of 5th day opportunities for students, particularly around remediation?
We are not planning on it, and we made that clear from the start that we that in making this, in filling out the survey, that it should not be considered something that would be a part of what we would be providing for the students of our school district. We tried to outline every aspect of every calendar that we could, one way or the other, presenting, here are the drawbacks, here are the positives of it, and go from there. We do have pre-K; those will be on a 5-day schedule next year, because they're mandated to. But otherwise, we are not. We have looked into it, but we are not planning on providing any 5th day services in the school district.
And you're saying that this request would be made no matter if you had a 4-day week or not. Is that correct?
We were yes, ma'am. We were looking at this no matter what calendar we were trying to what calendar was approved by our school board.
Okay, I'll open it up again to board members' questions or comments.
Yeah, if I may, Superintendent Warren, could you talk a little bit about what the driving factors were around the choice of 4 days? You said there was a lot of community input and feedback. Were there one or two overwhelming factors that seemed to stand out to you that were driving the interest in a 4-day school week?
I don't remember one thing or two things that I could specifically draw back to. Mr. Ferguson is our assistant superintendent. He was a part of that. He might be able to speak to it as well, but I don't remember a deciding, one thing or two things that people were latching onto as a community to say this is why we were supportive of a 4-day school week. There were aspects of it from the staff that were, teacher retention and things like that, but I don't remember the community at large having, just one idea or one thing that they were saying this is why we are for it.
Thank you. Do you feel that from a school board and administration standpoint that the driving interest in a 4-day week is teacher retention, or is there something else from your perspective that's the driver? Or did you have a preference?
I tried to stay pretty neutral on the calendar selection. We presented, obviously we presented it to the PPC and CPPC, and as far as I was concerned, it was we saw research in the state of Arkansas, even the Office of Educational Policy, that pointed out that 4-day school week did not have, it didn't have there was not a noticeable negative effect on student achievement from that standpoint. We talked to other school districts that were doing it. There is a teacher recruitment aspect of it that is appealing to us as a rural school district right next door to 4 school districts that are very much larger than we are. We have seen, I don't have the data in front of me to be able to just tell you the number, but we have seen a reduction in the number of teachers that we our attrition rate has gone down a little bit from this point in time last year to this year, especially since we made the March decision at our school board meeting to go to the 4-day week. So there is a little bit of that from my standpoint. But I don't know that was a deciding factor. When we presented the information to our school board and to our community, we looked at all aspects of it, and specifically the research that showed that there was, as long as you kept your instructional hours and instructional minutes, it didn't have a negative impact on our student achievement.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I should say potentially, we haven't done it yet, so.
Yeah, to be determined, to be
Yes,
seen.
ma'am. Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
thank you.
Any board members with additional questions or comments at this point? Board members in the auditorium?
Dr. Moore, I'd like to go ahead and make the motion that we approve this one-year waiver for the Huntsville School District, class size waiver.
I'll second.
Okay, so there's a motion by Ms. Rollins to approve. There's a second by Mr. Bragg. The floor is open. Any comments? Okay. We will take a vote then. Everyone turn on your microphones. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we will move on to the next item on our agenda. But before, I will take a point of privilege. I know we talked about last time, potentially to have a work session in the future about school calendars. I think obviously that was weighing heavy on this decision in my mind, and I know others, so I think there is some more conversation to be had there. Obviously, we don't want to set policies because they don't hurt kids. We want them to because they help kids. So that was concerning to hear, and I hope that we can encourage all to make decisions, particularly for a D school, where we're going to build kids up even further.
And just,
With that, I will
well, and just Dr.
end my
Moore,
point.
just real
Yes.
quick to that, we do have that request. We're working on pulling out that information. Our intention is to do that workshop in June around the June board meeting. So we will definitely have the follow-up because I think it's very important that if we're going to take a
Great.
stance on it, we do it right.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 2, the request for approval of the ABC program renewal grant.
Thank you, Board, for having us back. It's a great opportunity to talk about Arkansas Better Chance, and I know this is the early childhood component is new for a lot of folks on the board. I just want to spend a second. There are 2 items on the agenda. One is the renewal grants. These are direct services to children, so these are funding that goes to school districts and education cooperatives and private early childhood programs who meet the standards to serve children, and they get an allocated number of slots. And we monitor that enrollment over the course of the year, and we start to make adjustments if we see declining enrollment or they're not filling those slots. So that is part of the arrangement and the agreement that we have with school districts and the programs who accept ABC funds. So the first item is really about direct services to children and home visiting. There was a question about home visiting, so I do want to just pause there for a moment and talk a little bit about that. Home visiting is a part of the law. It's an option for local programs. We do not dictate a percentage or even mandate that programs do home visiting or center-based. We let the community determine that. So they write in what they want to do, how they want to serve children. And the home visiting model is something we're having a lot of conversations about at the department in terms of direction and how we want to serve children. We have a long history of that in Arkansas. It really was a big part of the originating law, but things have changed over time. You know, families are working more. Welfare reform happened after the original law passed, and we saw a lot more children being served in center-based services for ABC than in home visiting. It is an option that allows families a choice, so I would point that out. They can choose if they don't want their children in center-based, but it may be something that we want to have further discussions about as we move forward. It's a very small number that we serve. We do have one of the professional services contracts with the home visiting network at Children's Hospital. We use 2 models, and that work is really about making sure we are using those programs to fidelity. So they provide the training and technical assistance. They are the designated HIPPY home instruction program for preschool youngsters model for the state, for the nation actually. It's here in Little Rock. So that's what that professional services contract is, but we also have home visiting slots. Again, those are driven by the community and what they submit in terms of their application. So that is the first item. Questions about that?
Board members in the auditorium, questions?
Yeah, how are the slots allocated?
So in the originating law, there was very specific language that we work with school districts that were lots of language changes over the years. At that time, it was schools in distress, I think is the wording that they had in the law. So we worked to identify with the department at the time, because we administered at that time at DHS. On behalf of the department, and so we worked with the department to look at those, and we've continued that process until it moved back over to the department a few years ago, and I think the tier model now is what we use, but there hasn't been any new funding, so theoretically it is the slots that have been given out there, unless there's a problem with that program, we identify a compliance issue or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or programs just turn in slots. We do have programs that sometimes relinquish. Maybe there's enrollment issues in an area. So they're allocated by that need. That's the first thing the law requires. So we look at, is that school one of those in that highest tier? Do we have that school district covered? But again, we haven't had new funding in a very long time to do any expansion.
Thank you.
When you say in the highest tier, can you talk a little bit more?
Tier 5, yes, tier 4 and 5. We would be looking at those schools that have, or DF schools, like those schools that really have been designated as having a lot of challenges and the students are not performing at the same level. So we want to make sure that there's pre-K in those districts to help that foundational start.
Board member questions, Ms. Rollins?
Yes, I think I've got a couple of questions. It says here that ABC is requesting to support foster children as well as homeless and displaced children. Is that something new?
It's not. It's actually in the originating law, Ms. Rollins. So it's part of the original law. There's the original ABC funding that has some designations for populations. The new law that passed in 2003 is more about the income and the age of children. So, but we pull those out to highlight because those children really need supports, and we want to make sure programs know that in their area to, you know, prioritize those populations for services.
And then it goes on to say the placement of a foster child or a displaced child in an ABC program would add a per child award above the total awarded number of slots. How does that work if a program is already full?
So the good thing is we're all together now and we can look at funding. So we have other child care funding through the federal block grant. Wouldn't necessarily have to be ABC, but those foster children have so much trauma that getting them in a high quality, there's lots of research about this, getting them in a high quality instructional program can really offset and mitigate some of that trauma and get them on the right pathway for success in K-12. So we want to try to do that. So we do give waivers. Most of the time what happens is a program may have one child over the 20 for a short period of time because there is movement. Families move, children may move to a different or, you know, disenroll. So there's lots of movement. I don't think programs generally carry more than 20 children for any length of time, but we do allow that to get a foster child into these high quality programs.
Good, thank you for that. That's all I have, Dr. Moore.
Ms. Woods, questions?
No, none from me, thank you.
Ms. Hunter?
None from me, thanks.
I I did have a question back to on the home visiting. I know, I mean, it seems to be somewhere over 5 million, which is a small portion of the 106 million. But I do have questions as to at what point in time it was decided about how much per pupil that is, and if y'all been able to evaluate if that's the right amount.
Yeah, so it is based, Dr. Moore, on the cost of the home visiting model, and we haven't increased that. We've kept it very stationary. I'm not sure that it's keeping up with the cost of inflation in those programs. It's close to $1,900 per child for home visiting now, but I know those programs have had some cost increases over the last few years, but we haven't had any funding to increase that. What we are doing, and what the board should know, is as slots are returning into the office, we are not pushing those back out. We are putting that in the budget to increase the amount to each program. We have to do that for them to keep up with the quality. So you may start to see a little bit of a reduction. It won't be huge numbers, but over time, it could look like there are fewer children being served, Dr. Moore. But it is really about the cost.
Is that for home visiting or center-based?
Both. It would help. It would be for both. If we have slots turned in, we would put that back in. I think probably we're doing it with center-based slots, but we could also increase a little bit for home visiting. The increase is so little because we have so few slots that are turned back in to the agency.
Okay, and the home visiting, can a student be both in a school and classified as home visiting? Or
Yes.
do they need to only be home?
Yes, we do allow for a small percent of children to be dually enrolled, and it is very specific to children, like, for example, foster care, where we may need to be helping a parent learn some skills in parent engagement, family engagement activities. So there's some very specific criteria for that. That is also a discussion we're having that we may be bringing back to the board as we move forward in time as to whether or not we want to continue that.
Is that up to 20% or up to 25%?
25% is what's currently in the rule, and that's not in statute, so that definitely could be changed. I will share that when you look at national research, and we certainly can work, there are home visiting programs in the state besides the funding that we have. There are some federal funded programs, but the national research around home visiting, the big models that have been tested, home visiting is a part of the model. So we sort of do this either or with our funding, and I'm not sure how that started many years ago, but I would just say there probably are children, and we need to work really closely in partnership with home visiting programs to try to make that happen for those families that need it, because, you know, any of those big Abecedarian and Perry preschool models, that home visiting was just part inherently of a center-based option. The child received the home visiting as well. It's part of the Head Start federal model as well, that there's some home visiting. So it's something to think about.
What ages can be enrolled in the HIPPY program?
So I think they have a 2-year-old component. Now, for many years it was 3 to 5, Dr. Moore, but they've added a 2-year-old now, and then parents as teacher is really a birth across, really up to age 8, but we do birth to 5 or before they start kindergarten.
Okay, and then the center-based, this is reflective of really just 3-year-old, but mainly 4-year-old.
Mostly 3s and 4s. We probably have a small number of infants and toddlers that were funded with the original ABC funding many years ago. That programs have continued, but not that many anymore. It's very expensive to care for infants and toddlers.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, so are Head Start and Early Head Start, are they eligible for ABC funds? So how does that work when it's dual funding? I guess I don't understand how they're able to receive.
Yeah, so really the way the law was written, it allows any provider who's willing to meet these high quality standards. So any licensed program in Arkansas, private, school, and so Head Start would fit into that. Generally what happens is ABC has a different income threshold. So if you're in a community and you're serving children for Head Start, it's up to 100, and then you can go up to 130% with federal Head Start funding. So for ABC, it goes up to 200% of federal poverty. So it allows them to serve additional children. It has allowed them to expand the scope of their services in a community, and so many of them just serve additional children through ABC that they couldn't serve in Head Start.
So a single child wouldn't be receiving, or a program wouldn't be receiving both funds for a single child?
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, they shouldn't be, and I've worked through some of those over the years. I remember one time, one school district had a big newspaper article about doing that dual service, and they're very proud of it. But we worked with them because the purpose of ABC was really to expand access for children. And so we really try to work with programs to let's look at the needs in that community and see if there's gaps in who's being served, and make sure that we're trying to get all the children into a center-based option. So we work really closely, but hopefully that's not happening. But I do know in the past there were some, especially at the very beginning when it was all very new, there were some instances, and we would work with the individual agencies because, again, I think the intent of this law was to expand access.
And you mentioned center-based, and when you're saying center-based in this context, you're also including family home, childcare. School districts you're considering separate. What about faith-based programs because they can receive ABC funding, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is the full range of for-profit and nonprofit, including school districts and educational cooperatives, but we do have some faith-based entities that are included and do receive ABC.
So I guess before we make a motion, I have a few other things that I wanted to say. In pulling this, it was, our intent is, in everything that we're doing now is more transparency, obviously, and where the money is going, and a deeper understanding by the board and of the department and sort of how this is working. So I love the opportunity for us to ask questions and dig into this. And one of the things that, this was, pulling this and being able to dig in a little deeper was alarming to some people because they're, perhaps they needed to go ahead and offer their contracts. They need to know that they're renewed. So one of the things that I'm hoping is that in the future that we'll get them a little bit earlier, perhaps around January. There are some questions that I still have that we're just unable to answer, I think because of the IT systems, the data collection. One thing I'm hoping to see maybe next time is perhaps breaking this down by license number. I think, like for instance, a state has 541 slots, but I don't believe all 541 are on campus. I think they're spread out. So by license number might give me a better understanding of the location, the total slots, and then we can connect it to perhaps the student learning. We'd look at their work sampling scores and be able to see how effective these programs are. One of the things that we're interested in doing is sort of defining high quality. If we're gonna continue, if we look at the Better Beginnings, is high quality levels 5 and 6? Is it as low as 3? Is it 4? Where does that fall? And do we have the outcomes to match the STAR number? Can parents rely on that STAR number to say, okay, this means better outcomes, not just a score on, an environmental rating scale, things like that. So seeing these sooner, and I think being able to build that data system so we can connect them will be very helpful in the future. And I think we're going to dig into this in the subcommittee as well, and so we can, for those of us that are deeply interested in the work, we're going to have a chance to look into this further. So I would like to move that we approve the, I want to get the wording right, it's not the professional service grants, it's the program renewal grants, and a move that we approve them.
Okay.
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you, Ms.
did I
Keener.
jump
There's a
the gun?
motion by Ms. Keener to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second by Mr. Bragg. Any questions or comments before we take a vote?
I just have one more
Oh,
question.
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I always thought this was mainly like pre-K. What services would be provided to infants or anybody less
Yeah,
than that?
so they are in classrooms just like preschoolers. Many children go to an early childhood setting starting as early as 6 weeks old. So the original law for ABC allowed birth to 5. So we had a few programs in school districts that picked up infants and toddlers back then. There's definitely research about the ability to serve children, especially low-income children, over a period of time that can help them gain or get more level with their peers. So there's some advantages to that, and those are definitely things that we can look at in the longitudinal data and child assessment data. But they're really in a center-based program, getting that language and literacy enrichment and really building those foundational skills for pre-K and then later kindergarten.
Thank you.
Thanks. So the floor is open. Motion has been made to approve the grant. turn off your microphone, or turn on your microphone. We will take a vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Next, we have the ABC Professional Service Grant on the agenda.
So these are professional services contracts that really support the professional development of the teachers and the staff who work in the Arkansas Better Chance program. Some of them are very specific to legislation. They're part of the law. Early learning standards, content areas like the literacy work that we're doing with Pre-K Rise and aligning that with the Rise initiative. So they're pretty specific. I will tell you, this is work where I'm really excited. We already have reduced. We took 2 contracts off for this round, but we are working very quickly as we close in on January to probably having, and we've been notifying our colleagues and friends that are contractors that there will be changes because the LEARNS Act has some very specific things like, for example, the class implementation and pilot that will be starting this fall that will be looking and is a better predictor of child outcomes, which will be starting this fall, potentially replacing the current environment rating scale tool that we use. So we're kind of in this middle section now where we have to continue that work with the environment rating scale, but start the implementation. And so I expect as we come back, those are things that you'll see in these professional services contracts, some of those changes. But we've tried to line up with what's required by the program, by the legislation, and what we hear from the field in terms of the needs. But I do expect many changes, not just in these, but also in our Chalker Development Block Grant that we heard last board meeting. So just some changes to align more with what's going on in LEARNS. We also attached a report. There's a link to an annual report. I know that was a question, trying to answer those questions about the number of trainings that they provided, the number of participants in those trainings, and just a one-pager to give you a sense of what they're doing, what each one of them is doing, what the purpose is. So some additional information linked to those, that one-pager that has the list with the amount of money that they receive.
Board members in the auditorium first, questions?
So is there a specific contract, I mean, once the grant's approved, is there a specific contract with each of these organizations?
Yes, each one of these organizations are doing very specific things to support the Arkansas Better Chance program, staff, teachers.
And those
et cetera.
changes you talked about from LEARNS would be incorporated in that?
Yeah, well, or maybe new things, Mr. Bragg. We may have new contractors or may have a different approach to how we're doing some of the work.
Okay, thank you.
Questions, Ms. Rollins?
Yes, I was just curious, how are the retention rates for the teachers and staff of the ABC programs? How are we doing with that?
You know, first of all, I would say there's been a lot of change since the pandemic, just in early childhood, but definitely in ABC. I have heard anecdotally this year, and we've been working to track, you know, an unintended consequence of LEARNS and the 50,000. Some school districts, some co-ops gave the early childhood teacher 50,000, some programs did not. So I have heard that, you know, we had a loss of teachers in some programs. We can get that. Ms. Rollins, we have that data available that we could look at from this past year to see what that retention rate looked like in ABC and
Yeah.
bring it back to the board.
Yes, I think that would be great to have that information. Why wouldn't all of the teachers gotten that $50,000 payments?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Remember, some of these programs are not connected to school districts, so they're private providers, so they wouldn't have received funding for that. I can't speak to all the districts or co-ops. I know many of them did, made an effort and have been able to give their teachers that raise, but it could be attached to funding and the number they sent in. You know, there are probably a multitude of reasons. But we have that data on the salaries of the teachers as well, so we could definitely do a compilation for the board for you to see, you know, what the averages are and what program staff are being paid. But it is definitely going to be different across the state. It looks a little bit different.
I think that'd be very helpful. Thank you for that. Dr. Moore, that's all I have.
Ms. Woods, questions?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Ms. Hunter?
None from me. Thank you.
And I know this is something we've talked about in years past when this has come before the board, but in your conversations about this looking differently in future years, are there any considerations to put out for RFP, any of the grants, and or include some sort of evaluations and accountability with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I see the secretary, he's probably wanting to dive into this, but yes, we definitely would want to follow the procurement process for the state of Arkansas, which is what we've always done. There have been changes, and I think some of them don't go out for procurement because there may be state agencies and it's handled a little bit differently. But I definitely and we have always traditionally wanted to go out with an RFP to get, people to write and submit. I think you get innovation that way. I love the idea of the evaluation. I think we might build in an evaluation component for each one, or we could do a separate evaluation component for the professional services contracts that we pay for. So there's a couple of different approaches, but those are things that we want to build into the system as we're making changes to make it better and improve.
Great. And then remind me, so there is an evaluation that's granted out every year, and is that an annual evaluation of all ABC programs?
That's the longitudinal study. That is a requirement in the legislation, Dr. Moore, and yes, it is an annual. And they do the work that links the children to the school district and assessment that they're having as they move through the system. And so we have our first seniors, and it's really incredible data. The children that have been in pre-K all that time in Arkansas are finishing on with their peers compared to children who didn't get pre-K at a much higher rate. So there's some really good data in the most recent longitudinal study. And that's included in the link to the University of Central Arkansas. They're the current contractors for that. And so you can see that longitudinal and former longitudinal studies at that link and at their website at Arkansas Research Center.
Thank you. Board members, questions? Back to the auditorium. Questions for you all?
I think everything that, we've spoken about everything, and you mentioned so much of what my questions and concerns are about on, certainly on the accountability, on going out to, going back to RFP, things like that. And again, I think, one of the systems that we use to track the professional service grants is our PDR system, and we know that it's not perhaps doing a good job of tracking the educators and what they're taking. There are, I think I'm in there at least 2, maybe 3 times. So cleaning that system up and linking it to current educators, dumping those that haven't used it in 5 years, and being able to see those numbers will be very helpful in reviewing this. So, and I did appreciate all the, seeing the workshops that were provided, seeing the number of attendance, seeing the and the ones that I could see there, the duplications were across the school year, so that it offered maybe being able to capture different teachers out at different points in the school year. That was helpful. It wasn't, it wasn't duplicating. Anyway, I think that's, this has been very helpful. And this is another thing too that I think coming back to us after we get the data system, being able to track some of those things and coming to us a little earlier so that we can dig into it in the reports. We can maybe get a sort of put together a report that's standard across all of them. One of looking at this, it was very helpful, but each report had its own little nuances, and where they were able to kind of highlight the things they do. Seeing a standard report would help us compare after that. So,
yeah, we definitely can do that.
If I could just add a comment to what I think about is great when we're having dialogue around our youngest children. We all know the research says that there is not a single better investment we can make as a state than making sure our students have the foundations they need so that when they get to kindergarten, they're ready to learn. So I do think it'd be appropriate to commend, Lori and Tanya and the team in our statewide that's working in this space, because they receive a lot of national accolades, and Arkansas has been praised over the past several years as a state that does a really good job in early learning. But the fact that we have these practitioners that have dedicated years of their lives saying, we're doing a good job, but we can still do better. And then with like Ms. Keener and the work group coming in and say, there's still opportunity in bringing in all the components of Arkansas Learns is just going to be an investment in time and energy that we're going to see wonderful return on that investment. And the more we can have conversations about getting this space right, we know that is the best investment that we can make. So I really do enjoy the questions, the dialogue, and I know as a system we're only going to keep getting better and stronger.
Thank you, Secretary. Board members, any other questions or comments? Then we'll open the floor for a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve the professional service grants for Arkansas Better Chance.
Okay, there's a motion by Ms. Keener. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second by Mr. Bragg. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. With that, I believe all that's left is the appointment of the nominating committee. And I believe as I read it, it is the chair's job to appoint the nominating committee. Do we need to take a vote on that? Do we know?
Yes, if we could. That way we have it on record and it's formalized.
Okay. So we have Randy Henderson, Lisa Hunter, and Adrian Woods. Thank you for volunteering to be on the nominating committee. Any questions or concerns or comments? Okay, so, and Secretary, I can totally hear. Do we take a vote?
I would. I think to have on record that this board is formally recognizing those individuals to serve in that capacity, it just keeps everything cleaner.
Okay, great. So I've nominated Randy Henderson, Lisa Hunter, and Adrian Woods. The floor is open for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the chair's nominations.
Thank you, Ms. Keener. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you all for volunteering to do that, and I know Mary will get with you on the next steps before our June meeting. With that, I understand there's no public comment. Is there any new business to come before our board?
Not necessarily new business, but maybe the next steps for this meeting as we adjourn the formal board meeting, if it's okay with the board, if we just take maybe a 5 to 10 minute break, that way we can kind of hit a little bit of pause, and then we do want to move into a workshop and present some draft rules. If folks are able to hang out a little bit longer with us online, we'd like to start sharing that with the board.
Okay. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting. What time would you all like to start the work session meeting?
Is 11:15 okay? Like, just gives everybody a few minutes. That way the court reporter can do their job as well.
Sounds good.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We'll be back at 11:15.